Christmas. It's coming up really soon. And if you're looking at a time series data set with, for the holidays, for example, Christmas would occur every year, and that's an example of seasonality. It's really that simple. And then the rest of it is just the error, the stuff that can't be explained by your level, trend, or seasonality. So that's it. And to gain some intuition, we'll go through a few examples in just a second. So, and what is forecasting? I mean, the goal is to predict or estimate the future. That's it. It's just that easy. So, and it's just that hard as we're going to go through.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, part of the basis of this talk is, I think, is to give a lot of the mechanics, at least get an intuition of how time series forecasting works, but also, I think, try and get some intuition of where it's really not applicable at all, and where you probably want to fall in some other avenues. So, because it's easy, you know, when I remember, I've been doing this since, I started doing time series forecasting back in like 2002. And I remember going into it with the youthful exuberance of, yeah, this is an awesome tool, I can use it for everything, and look how I can predict the future. And yeah, that was really dumb. So I don't know how many times I've fallen on my ass as a result of that. You know, and it's to the point now where I consider it a tool to be used in conjunction with other tools. So otherwise, you're the tool, and then you get to explain yourself why you're all wrong. So let's predict something. And the goal, again, is to gain an intuition for forecasting. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, human beings came up with a way of figuring out how to forecast time series. So I think, and when you talk to people, I think it's kind of when you ask them like, oh, what's the stock market going to do tomorrow, right? I mean, everyone sort of has an idea, and it's based upon, you know, a certain set of data and intuition, and you know, and pattern matching and all this other stuff, right? I mean, and humans are good at some things and really crappy at others, and so. Let's look at one, Bitcoin price. Let's try and predict this. This is as of today. And in fact, it's actually not as of today, because I think it went to 13,000 just a few hours ago. So
14.
14. Oh shit. Okay, this is out of date. So never mind.
I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I saw it too. Yeah. So I guess tomorrow, where do you think Bitcoin would go?
Down 20,000.
Anyone else?
100K.
Okay. And what are we basing all that on? Is it a trend, maybe, or is there? So I mean, is there a detectable pattern with how Bitcoin moves day by day?
Exponential.
I mean, except okay. Is there, you know, is there a trend that it follows that would be identifiable, right? Have you seen level changes in the data where the data is, well, obviously it's kind of grown a bit. But I mean, there's any detectable pattern in this except like basically a vertical line at the end of the chart.
Well, I mean, you could see before and after you have that first spike just before 2014, right? And that would be a level change where it sort of reached a new stable point there for a bit.
And then, I mean, and if you were back here and you're trying to forecast the price of Bitcoin in 2017, do you think you would have been able to figure that out from this data? So I only show this to show, give this chart to show that there's definitely limitations to time series forecasting. You know, and in a business context, and I'll go through this in a bit more, but it's best when you have some predictability to your data, i.e. you have a lot of data, so you have seasonality that you can draw from. There's a trend, and there's not a lot of, well, it doesn't do this, basically. Where it's just like, you know, stuff comes out of left field and the world gets, you know, hyped about Bitcoin and then drives the price up. So this is another example of, I think it's Australian beer production from 1992 to 2008. And I do apologize for the lack of the more refined x-axis, but what do you think this will look like if you tried to forecast this? Do you think it's going to go, I'll try and scan. Do you think it's going to go way up here or down here, or what, you know, tell me where you think this is.
Well, first looks like it's undersampled.
It's seasonal.
Mega liters, not liters.
Did you see any seasonality in this?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you see maybe a trend?
Yeah.
Okay.
Going down, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is an example of a time series data set that's actually used in tutorials to sort of you know, show off algorithms, and it's it's usable. So, better than the Bitcoin one. So anyway, this hopefully you get the intuition of like what kind of data set would be useful for time series forecasting and which is just utter crap. Like Bitcoin would fit into the latter category right now. And I'll give another example of that later. So again, as I alluded to with my own personal experience, I thought this would be a hammer and everything in the world looked like a nail. So just try and avoid that because it's really tempting. And the biggest assumption with time series forecasting is that the future will be similar to history, right? At the end of the day, whether it's machine learning, whether it's time series forecasting, or whether it's any sort of predictive analytics, it's glorified pattern recognition at the end of the day. That's all it is. And the assumption is that what you've seen will hopefully carry forward. But in business context, this isn't always the case. I remember Ken, who's sitting over here. That's Ken, who waved his hand. So we worked at Backcountry back in 2008, and I'm sure everyone remembers what happened in the fall of 2008. Bitcoin, actually, the paper's recent. But so we were doing demand planning over at Backcountry for various goods, and can you imagine basically if you're trying to do forecasting up until the crash happened? And then all of a sudden demand drops off. It's a pretty big deal. So, and there's nothing that can prepare you for that. There was nothing in history that would indicate that, there's going to be a gigantic financial crisis, and therefore we must, react accordingly. And so, again, the caveat with all of these things is that, the future will be similar.
It wasn't really the first crash, was it?
What's that?
It wasn't really the first crash, right? So some people do actually try to predict it.
Oh, a lot of people try and predict it. Yeah, I mean, my uncle owns a high-frequency trading firm. What they try and do all day? Predict things. So they try and make a lot of money off it. But, so the point being, it's hard to do. Even the best minds in Wall Street, that's what they try and do all day, and they can't get it right half the time or most of the time. So anyway, so hopefully this is enforced because this is the golden rule of forecasting. So anyway, here's the Australian beer production forecast. And this is going 2 years forward from the data that was provided from the earlier slide. So I can't remember the model that they used on this, but this kind of gives you an idea of what a time series forecast would look like. You have your history, and then you have your forecast. So it's as simple as that.
I think it's an ARIMA model?
Might have been. Yeah, I can't remember what they used. So it was in, what was it? I think it was one of the examples they used in the R's forecast package.
Okay.
Yeah. So it very well could have been ARIMA. And so I know it's a popular one to test on. So here's the main types of time series forecasts. There's regression, which you've all kind of implicitly learned in high school. I think when you were doing what would it be like when you're learning like the slope of a line or something like that. It's a univariate case of regression, but it's basically just how, if you were to draw like a line, like a slope, like how far would it go out, and if I put some points on that, like what is my forecast? That's surprisingly still what a lot of business people do with spreadsheets. They'll use the trend line functionality and project that forward and call that the forecast. So this does happen. There's naive forecasting, which there's different variations of this, but it's essentially just taking the data that the last data point or last data points and just carrying those forward. That's it. And then there's exponential smoothing, which is like a weighted average methodology. There's ARIMA, which you pointed out, which more falls into like autocorrelations of time lags. And then there's newer methods like profit. And I've seen some people using LSTMs in deep learning. I haven't played with those yet. I have played with them a bit, but I'm not going to attempt to talk about it. So I'm kind of a rookie at that. So again, if you want to know about more of these, I'm going to give you some resources at the end. There's plenty of. These are like entire classes that you can take to understand these sorts of things. So I'm not even going to begin to try and describe them in great detail. But we can do a talk after, or you can go to the links in the slides. So here's a forecasting flowchart that you can't really read, but there's a link down here. And the reason I'm showing you this is, it sets up the use for something like profit. In the past, if you're doing this manually, you would start with your time series and basically follow some sort of criteria like that. Does the data, does it meet these certain criteria? Do we need to log transform it? Do I need to do this, that, or the other thing to the data, right? And ultimately, what type of, which one of these would I use, right? So it can get a bit cumbersome, and that's why there's automated solutions out there. This is still great if you have a really good handle on the data and domain expertise and understand the problem and can work your way through this pretty quickly. But when you start getting into forecasting, more than a few forecasts even, it just becomes insane to try and do this all. So, where'd my screen go? Here's some best practices that I found. These aren't all of them, but these are definitely some of the big ones. Like, you want to establish an error metric. So a really popular one is MAPE, mean average percent error. And there's different variations of MAPE. There's MAD, mean average deviation, I think. Yeah. You want to determine your forecast horizon too. Like, are you doing it in days? And if so, like 30 days, 90 days, a year out, more. Forecast grain. Are you forecasting at like a product level if you're a product company? Or are you forecasting at a general ledger level if you're doing financial general ledger forecasting? Are you forecasting at a customer level? It's all really important. So you need to figure that out. Your time grain as well, days, weeks, months, years. I had a person ask about, how much data to use, right? So it was, so the general rule of thumb is if you just want to get a trend, knock yourself out, use whatever you want. If you want to start getting seasonality in the forecast, 2 consecutive periods is great, so 2 years worth of data or more helps with that. Otherwise, there's no identifiable trend for the, seasonality for the, there's no corresponding data points for the forecast model to look at. And then again, like I alluded to, for more than a few forecasts, just choose an automated approach, like seriously. And it's great to want to like hand model your time series algorithm, but I mean, when if you start to get, backcountry, Ken, how many SKUs were we trying to forecast?
We had between, I think, somewhere around the neighborhood of 30,000 styles and 100,000 variants at the time. This is years ago. It could be a lot bigger than that at this
Sure.
point.
Yeah, so I mean, if you wanted to handcraft all those, go for it. But yeah, we chose an automated approach at one point to help with that.
It's different seasonality for every single product group.
Bingo.
So
Mm-hmm.
a lot to do.
There's a lot to do. So, like I said, my experience is more in the business area. So the types of business forecasts that I've seen are statistically driven. So these would be the time series forecasts that you'd be generating using a software package. There's a domain expert forecast. This person may or may not be using a statistical forecast, but they have a gut feeling that certain patterns or certain events will continue into the future. You see this all the time, with salespeople, for example. They'll, in my experience, they'll look at your statistical forecast and say, oh, that's really cool, but I'm definitely more than capable of hitting these numbers here. And so that becomes the forecast, not your statistical forecast. And so these are some of the gotchas I want to get into. So you have your domain expert, and that might be your marketing person or your CFO or something like that, right? So the forecast, on the ground, it's nice and all that we can come up with statistical forecasts, and I think that's a good baseline. But it's only the first step. In a lot of cases, depending on the organization, it may not really matter. Because it might get to the HIPPO, the highest, informed paid person's opinion, which is going to be your CEO, right? So just from practical considerations, it's like, you as the data person are going to say, well, I think sales are going to be 30 million. Like, that's cute. So I think they're going to be 100 million. Okay? So, and this happens all the time. I haven't been in a company that hasn't happened at. There's a lot of reasons why this happens. So, if you look at your statistical forecast as being sort of an objective baseline of where the numbers might be going, that's I think that's a good mental place to start for you. Alongside with this is guessing. This seriously happens all the time. Like every company I've worked at, they want to be $1 billion or more company. And so it takes a lot of, I would say, guesswork shenanigans to figure out what that model looks like, because these forecasts that they're providing are as much useful for their planning as it is to get investors to give them money and all this other stuff.
That Bitcoin crash.
Hiring this guy as my new CFO. But honestly, I mean, these are the kinds of things you got to watch out for. I mean, again, I've been around the block a bit, and it's nice to say that, yeah, we're data scientists, yeah, we're data analysts, and that's great. But you got a whole business to contend with, and this is the reality of it. So just being pretty, straight up about this, like, again, the time series forecasts are great. Know how to use them in other ways. And the other types of business forecasters is a combination of all these, which is a lot of what I've seen as well. So you'll produce as an analyst or a data scientist, you'll present your version of the forecast, and then there will be adjustments made to it. And it eventually settles on a number. So what can happen if forecasts are wrong? If you're in manufacturing, there's this thing called the Bullwhip Effect. Does anyone know what that is?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah. So,
Well,
yeah.
I've had my forecast a little bit, and so my upstream vendor says, oh, they're going to want 80, so they've had their forecast to 100. It can also go the other way.
Yeah.
Dampen it down, but each person in the supply chain adds a little bit. So suddenly you produce 9 times as much of the input that you need.
Yeah, exactly. So going back to the 2008 example, right? So we had done our forecasting, issued all these purchase orders to vendors, and the lead times for a lot of these products are 9 months out. So guess what happens? Demand drops off. They already have their purchase orders out with their suppliers, and pretty soon it's just like all hell breaks loose, because there's like millions of dollars committed along the supply chain. You can't go back on your commitments. And pretty soon, like, everyone's like totally effed. And then, yeah, it's awesome. And this happens due to forks. So, in response to that, you see supply chains like just in time, like Toyota does. They started that, and a lot of other companies have, taken that into account, where they try and tighten the supply chain, along the way to prevent stuff like this happening. Because it's a classic thing. Like, if your forecast goes wrong, like a lot of things happen. Like, this isn't just some forecast in a bubble exercise. Like, this has real consequences. I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I'm gonna say, like, the forecast, if you want to look at like the data analytics hierarchy of needs in terms of importance to a business, the forecast, I argue, is probably the most important thing. Because if that goes wrong, you get that. So, and if you get it right, you'll get to keep your jobs.
Right.
So that's what happens. So I don't care how many awesome data scientists you hired from Stanford or wherever. Like, if your business forecast is off, they all might be out looking for other work at another company that has crappy forecasting, probably too. So, and hence, and on and on it goes. We've seen it up and down the businesses as well. Startups do this all the time. They have their forecast, and just trying to get money and all this other stuff. So they're trying to have a forecast to meet expectations, and when that doesn't happen, then, well, you just got to cut some people out, and that's how it is. The expensive people are expensive. So, and this happens all up and down. Again, like what Ken and I saw at Backcountry back in the day, I mean, these vendors, we're talking big ones too. They have massive layoffs because of people like us and other companies, all up and down their supply chain, suddenly cutting orders because we can't commit that much cash, and sorry.
Yeah.
So, so this is really important. And again, I think having understanding of the effectiveness of where time series forecasting come into play in a business and where they have their limitations is really, really critical. So, as much as I want to get into technicalities, I also want to just hammer home, the importance of the applications of this type of stuff as well. Because it's serious as a heart attack. You get this right, great. You get this wrong, I don't know what happens to you. So some of the best practices I've seen for business forecasting, you as the analyst or data scientist produce the baseline statistical forecast. Be able to back it up, try and understand your domain as much as humanly possible. Use an automated solution if it's available. It's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of headache. And get input from the business. You should be meeting very frequently and adjusting your forecasts. And I didn't mention this, but the types of forecasts we're talking about are short term, so maybe year out, maybe less. It's really hard to get, I think, good statistical forecasts going out further than that, at least when I've seen from business data. Now, econometric data may be a totally different story. I don't know anything about that. But just again, the way a business can even react to a forecast, I think a year is about as far as you're going to reasonably go before you run into, sort of just a land of make-believe, really. So, and if possible, if you're a product business, and this may be applicable to other businesses as well, but there's a phenomenon called collaborative planning and forecasting. So this means, like, in the supply chain example, you would be meeting with your vendors and retailers, and you would come up with a holistic forecast that takes into account all their different inputs. And from there, everyone's on the same page as terms of what a forecast is, and it's adjusted as frequently as possible. And why that's important is, it eliminates a lot of the issues with the bullwhip effect, which I showed earlier. If people have information more frequently, they're able to adjust. And transparency is the best key, I think, to eliminating a lot of issues. Top-down versus bottom-up forecasting, you should know the difference. A top-down forecast, an example of that would be your CEO and CFO say, okay, we're going to become $1 billion company next year, and we're doing $60 million in revenue right now. Something really, really realistic like that. So now you have to figure out, and they may give you, like, the CFO may put together sort of a plan to get there in an Excel sheet for the year, and then your job is to take that and allocate that forecast down to a product level and hope to God that that same seasonal curve applies to every single product that you just allocated down to, because that's what just happened. The other approach is bottom-up forecast, where you just forecast at the most granular level. So if you're a product company, forecast by product, and then add all those up, and that becomes your forecast. It can become very noisy, so because you may have SKUs with not a lot of history that are just introduced, and then you have to go back to maybe chaining products together in order to get a comprehensive history, and that becomes a task in itself. So there's just a lot of work, and then there's there's hybrid approaches as well. It sort of starts in the middle and maybe goes up and then goes down, or and so forth. So there's a number of ways to do this, but just know the difference between all these, because if a CEO gives you, or executives give you their plan and ask you to do something with this, you should know that everything that you forecast will be reflective of that plan. So, and then another thing you need to know is what promotions, advertising, competitor actions, or other types of events were in the history of this forecast, right? Because those may not repeat. You may have done a one-time promotion back in the day that spiked your sales, and for you to want to forecast that going forward, you need to know if that's going to be a repeated event or not, right? And there's other things as well, like I guess we'll get into holidays. Holidays, sort of an event, sort of a date thing, but like Thanksgiving, for example, right? It happens every Thursday of every year, so that's not really a date. So it's just sort of like a day. So you need to know how to adjust for those too, because if you're doing time series, you might accidentally forecast a big spike in sales on a different day, and then it's kind of crappy planning at that point. And then there's also the 4-5-4 calendar, which is used in retail. So there's a lot of nuances to this. So just understand the type of data and more importantly, the type of domain that you're dealing with.
Real quick, what is the 4-5-4 calendar?
What was that, Ken? It was like 4 weeks?
4 weeks, 5 weeks, 4 weeks. So, for example, January would have 4 weeks, February would have 5. Regardless of how many days are actually in the month, you do a 4-5-4 calendar.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it gives you a nice even 4 quarters with 13 weeks each in them.
Yeah. Yeah, and also understanding like your fiscal calendar, right? So there might be like this one company I'm contracting with. They start their fiscal year in October. So I don't know. I guess that's a thing. So Walmart starts theirs in I think February. So.
U.S. government starts on October also.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Huh. All right. So in terms of forecasting software, what's available? These are the ones that I could think of. I'm sure there's more. So there's, up to now I've either been using a closed source package called Forecast Pro, which I didn't list here, and that one's awesome. But there's also the open source Forecast package in R, appropriately named, and that one's great. It does automated forecasting. And it just does a whole slew of stuff. Like Rob Hinman, I think is his name. He developed the package along with somebody else, but it is a fantastic forecasting package. And up to now, up until Prophet came out, which is the second one, I would just use the forecast package in R. And for some cases, I would probably still use it. I think it offers, it's probably the best one out there still. Facebook Prophet. This is the one that we'll be going over a few examples of. And it, in my opinion, is probably the best best time series forecasting software you could use for business. Facebook developed this internally for use with their business analysts. And they wanted something that was easy to use, that a business analyst wouldn't need to spend a lot of time coding. They could tune a few parameters and just go to town on the forecast, which is, and then adjust the forecast from there, assuming that the analyst is also a domain expert, and there's so they're using it for like website traffic and and forecasting other types of events like that. And we'll get into the specifics, but it worked out pretty well. There's other packages like stats models. I haven't really played around with that too much because I was mostly just using the forecast package in R, but stats models looks pretty interesting. I couldn't tell if it could do any automated forecasting, so by that I really wasn't interested in pursuing it. And then causal impact and anomaly detection. These were mentioned in the Prophet paper, actually. The Facebook Prophet people also made a white paper about their package and listed a few inspirations, including forecast, causal impact, and anomaly detection. So I haven't played with those too much. Again, they didn't really fit the use case I was looking for. But one of them's from Twitter, and the other one's from someone else. So I think they're more used for like website, like maybe, I don't know, anomaly stuff, as it says. So Facebook Prophet, it's very easy to use. It's business focused. It's in Python and R. From a business user standpoint, if they have even a base knowledge of Python or R, they could use this pretty easily. It's an additive model, and if you don't know what that is, we'll talk about that later. And it uses Stan under the hood. So I don't know too much about Stan. I'll be the first to admit. Does anyone know about Stan? Terrific. We'll have a great conversation about Stan later. As far as I can tell, Stan is a, let's see, so it's like a Bayesian stats modeling package. I'm going to totally crucify it. But Prophet uses it under the hood for a lot of the simulated histories that it makes. So we can get into that in a second. But the nice thing with that is the algorithmic platform is under the hood, and then they can sit R and Python on top of it, and it just calls Stan underneath. So when we go into the source code for Prophet, you'll see that there's basically an R and a Prophet or Python package, and they both just pull it. They assemble all the data, then pull it into Stan, and then get a model back. And it's pretty cool. So now you can basically extend this to any language as well, not just Python or R. It uses simulated forecast history, which I just talked about, and that's in Stan. So you can read this. This is just a quote of bullet points I took from the Prophet webpage. It sort of describes what it's most useful for, right? The types of characteristics of a forecast that you would want to use Prophet with. So again, it fits a business context very well. I don't know that it would fit things like, I don't know, give me an example of something non-business related where you do time series, like healthcare, for example.
Technology forecasting. So you would say, I invented the solar cell, in 1960, what's it going to do in 2020?
Okay, yeah, it would totally suck at that. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then it's like healthcare, right? Like it might,
Like flu trends.
yeah, like I don't know how it would work on that, right? If it fits this criteria, maybe, right? So it has a very specific use case. Like I said, if you wanted to customize a model, I still think that R's forecast package is a lot better. But it's up to you. You're the expert. They do have this paradigm of human analyst in the loop. I think the recognition is that having a totally automated system is probably reckless. So you want to have a domain expert who can look at the forecast, sanity check it, model it, and go back through. And this loop never stops either. Because there's always something new coming up, hopefully, in your business. Otherwise, you have a really boring business. But it's a pretty key thing. They made this so their business analyst, who is hopefully a domain expert in website trends or whatever, could use this tool and at least get a really accurate forecast versus a gut feel or stats alone. So I don't know if you can see this. Apologies. So this is from the Facebook Profit paper. They took, I can't remember the data set they've used, but they basically did some simulated forecasts based on like ARIMA, exponential smoothing, a naive. Can't read that one there. I can't remember what is it. But so this is how Profit performed on its simulated forecast versus these other types. So it was able to capture a lot of the nuances of the data a lot better than the ARIMA model or the exponential smoothing model, which actually did pretty well as well. So the guts behind this is that they, so you're dealing with exponential smoothing and dealing with a moving average, weighted moving average. So weights, decay over time, and autocorrelated data. And what they've done here for seasonal trends, they use a Fourier series, totally different. So it took me, I did my math degree here, and I had to refresh my memory what a Fourier series was. So Dylan will probably know. What's up?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You must be real proud of capturing that peak. I'm sure that.
This one?
Yeah, I'm sure they did a bunch of these simulations, and that one, they're like, oh, look, we go above everybody else. That example is handpicked out of there.
Yeah, I'll leave a. I have a link to the paper. I would suggest if you're really interested in knowing the guts of how Profit works, go through the paper, because exactly, they were very excited about this.
Right.
Like, wow, look at this, it does stuff.
It predicts that.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Maybe I'm the only one that's in the dark. Can you explain this figure to me?
Yeah, sure.
Points are the data?
Points of the data, right.
And then the color are bands of
So
prediction?
so they would take basically a forecast for this period, this period, this period, this period. So they're simulating the forecasts that would have
Based
occurred.
off of the
beginning. Yeah, exactly. So
Up until the start of that forecast, presumably.
Yeah.
So the training set is everything up until the new color starts?
Correct.
I believe so, yeah. They didn't really go into detail of like what it was.
Is it a band? So the colors are a band, or
There's a cutoff.
As far as I know, that's what it forecast actually.
Yeah.
so they're actually it's a line.
Yeah. If you're just thinking of it like.
Well, it's a band.
It's a band.
It's a range.
The range
Yeah.
that it will be.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm not clear if it was just the data itself and if it had prediction intervals in it or not. Prediction intervals would just basically tell you like sort of the range of uncertainty.
What does the range mean? Does it mean like, is there a statistical definition of range? Is it maximum?
So I know that it defaults in Profit to 80%.
80%?
Yeah, but you can customize it to whatever you want. Yeah, so and it's also, as far as I can tell, it uses Stan under the hood to generate these sorts of simulated forecasts. So that's what it does. Again, not an expert in Stan, so I'll be totally full of shit if I try and explain that. But yeah, so it does capture, at least in their example, it captures the nuance of the data better than traditional methods. So again, it might be an overfitting thing, it might be something different, I don't know. But they use this as an example and they really like it and they stood by it. So good enough for Facebook, good enough for me. And so here's the error that they claim for Profit versus these other models. So if you went off of mean absolute percentage error, which is a pretty standard time series error metric, profit beats the pants off of the others. So, in this example, right? And always caveat it with that, because it's with this data. With other data, it may not do as well.
Aren't there standard forecasting test sets that you would run it against?
There are. I mean, the Australian beer production is a pretty standard canonical example. And there's also another one, I think it's the lynx data set. So it was like a population of lynx over the years. And it's it's sort of like what you would use in machine learning, like the XOR problem for classification. Like XOR doesn't work for linearly separable data, and so it's a way of spoofing your forecast, and the lynx data set is the equivalent of that. You would throw links at your time series to know how awesome or crappy your forecasting is. And most models break or they do terribly on the lynx data set. And so they would contrast that with like use one that works and then use one that sucks. So
You might notice that Reno is horrible.
yeah.
By far the worst.
Yeah, it's
In one day it's great, and then it goes away.
and that's just it too. You know, I mean, I talked to other people who have had great success with the REMA models in the past, and you know, in my experience, I've always had better success with exponential smoothing models for whatever reason, and just based upon the data that I have. And again, it's totally case by case. So I would say just be open-minded and try a lot of new things. I don't know, maybe profit's great, maybe it's not for your particular use case. So, and then again, that's where the automation comes in, you know, so as well as just diving into it. Cool, let's do an example using profit of this problem. So, simple import, you're going to use pandas and NumPy for this example, and then you're going to import profit with a really simple install. Now, caveat, if you're pip installing profit, you want to get PyStan as well. It doesn't really tell you that. PyStan is also not the smallest package in the world. It's enormous, actually, and it takes up a lot of memory. I think well over 2 gigs, as a bare minimum, just to run it. So a lot of overhead. I learned this the hard way when I tried putting it on an EC2 micro instance and it wouldn't work. Then I had to keep escalating it to something that would work. So, you know, 'cause I'm trying to set up a pipeline with stuff, because why not, right? And then, learn the hard way that might need some more robust stuff. I think, you know, as an aside, I was trying to set up on Lambda to begin with, so I thought it'd be kind of cool to send forecasts, put them as 3, then forecast them. Now Lambda upped the memory, I think to 3-something gigs, so you might be able to use it now. So have fun. So anyway, code workflow. Bitcoin price since inception is the first example. We're going to read this data set in. It's just basically a CSV download from CoinDesk of Bitcoin price since inception. So here's the first few values. It was at 9 cents back in 2010. So if you invested then, then congratulations, and held it. So anyway, profit is kind of picky. Notice that there's a date and a close price. It won't let you do that. You have to rename them to DS and Y. So just a heads up. This will also cause you frustration if you're not too careful. So anyway, and this is pretty cool. So if anyone has done time series in R, you might remember how there's just a lot of, I wouldn't say there's a ton of ceremony, but there's lines of codes to write. But, you know, this is pretty cool though, because now you just instantiate a new instance of profit, give it your data frame. Give it, make a future data frame, so whatever your forecast horizon is, and this is going to be daily, but you can also do it, I think by month, and now sub-daily, I believe, or daily. The monthly is weekly, something like that, whatever. You can specify it with parameters here for whatever you want to do. So this is the future we're going to try and forecast for, and then you just call predict. This model, and then this on this future date frame. And they tried to follow the paradigm of sklearn. So if anyone's used sklearn, it's basically the fit and then predict model. And this is no different. So what they wanted to do is make it as seamless as possible for people coming from that universe over to Prophet. So, and yeah, here's your forecast. So I mean, I selected the date and then white hat, which is your forecast, and basically the uncertainty of your forecast, so the lower and upper bounds of that forecast. And with no defaults, I think it's at 80% right now. So anyway, and then we can plot the forecast. Now you'll see something truly amazing, which is that. So this is the data for Bitcoin as of 3 o'clock today. The points, and then here's what Prophet thought it would forecast using the inception data. I showed this intentionally because it's a really shitty forecast. I called it terrible here, but that's kind of the same thing. So,
It's most of it, right?
Those are some pretty big spikes.
yeah.
If you're investing based on...
So this is an example, I think, because I know people would want to try this with Bitcoin price, right? Like it's a tempting experiment to do. Like, oh, we got a forecasting tool, so let's try and do the stock market, right? That's not just when everyone tries that. And now it's going to be Bitcoin, right? Because why not? I mean, you can try cutting out, you're going to try different intervals, I'm sure. But like, oh, let's try it on this date range here. And then, obviously we'll get a spike, and cool, we're great forecasters all of a sudden. So, yeah. So.
Yeah, but would you look at this and say that directionally it's still increasing?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's still, maybe not where it's going to be, but that it's going to go up.
It captures the trend for sure, right? So, yeah.
I mean, I think it's right directionally.
Oh, it is absolutely. And I think if you were to cut the, your date range down, you would be able to capture.
Can you just do that? Can you do it now?
Live coding.
No, I'm not going to live code it. Made that mistake too. Anyway, so this is an example, I think, and again, alluding to, youthful exuberance. Like, you want to try this, and then this is where you find out, I think, kind of the limitations of the tools. And so, but we've already been through this, right? We already went through the Bitcoin example, trying to predict that, and yeah. What's up?
So I'm curious if there are like parameters as far as like what kind of periodicity or what kind of seasonality is involved in the data set, because it looks like it's expecting a Christmas Bitcoin rush.
That's interesting, yeah. So,
it almost looks like there's a bias towards that.
Yeah. Prophet is really cool. This is the Prophet page, and they offer a ton of different ways you can tune, right? So there's parameters, there's seasonality and holiday effects if you wanted to provide dates for when holidays may have occurred.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't give these examples in here because I think you all can read and go through these, because there's a lot of stuff basically. Prophet has what it calls automatic change point detection. So it starts, what is it with? It's a uniform distribution of I think it has 10 change points for a year. I'll just uniformly separate those out. But if you find that there are in this data, if there's change points here, big, just events happen where there's sudden seismic shifts in the data that you know about as a domain expert, you can flag those as change points, and Prophet will pick those up and include that in its model. Otherwise, it'll just uniformly distribute those out. More change points mean more oscillations in your data, right? So, again, yeah, that was good actually. Any other questions on this data set?
So the training set is all the points, right?
Yeah.
So
in this one, yeah.
Right. So really, what you would call the forecast was just 2018 and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So it did really bad in 2016.
So the rest is just like you could just look at the residuals for the other part.
Yeah. This is. It's a terrible forecast.
It really gets thrown off because it's trying to do something yearly, and there's obviously a non-yearly trend there.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so if it just looks at 2013 and then 2017, it goes, oh, at the end of the year it's going to spike because those are pretty strong signals.
So again, right? It's just dumb math at the end of the day. That's all it is, right? You guys have single-handedly pointed out many holes in this, and so that's where again the analyst in the loop comes back into the picture, right? You have certain domain knowledge or certain foresight that this doesn't have, because how would it know? But again, You
So
know,
again, do you think that's better, or did you check and see if that's better than supposed Bitcoin experts have been?
I didn't check that. No, I mean, if I'm going to go anecdotally, I've heard, was it John McAfee had a pretty famous prediction, so he'll, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you need a lot of them.
What's that?
You'd need a lot of them to actually tell they're doing better.
Yeah.
That's terrible forecast.
And I hear various things like, oh, it's going to crash tomorrow, or oh, it's going to 1 million next year. So I don't know. I mean, as an anecdote, the thing, when I was in Beijing a couple weeks ago, I was hanging out in the airport with this guy who's a hip hop producer, and I had a clothing company, and he had just bought a Bitcoin mining operation in Malaysia. Right, so he's getting in on this, and he's like, yeah, I totally think it's going to go to hundreds of thousands of dollars next year. And I'm like, okay, based on what? It's like I just, but he didn't know what Bitcoin was. He just saw the price momentum, so obviously it must keep going up, right? So I don't know.
And that's how you get more Bitcoin. Is mine for it.
Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong in his approach, but yeah, so I don't know. But he's, he being now a Bitcoin mine owner thinks it's going to go to 6 figures.
There's a bunch of them out there.
Do you know if Malaysia has cheap energy?
Yeah, it does. That's why he did it. But I was like, it's kind of hot there, right? Like, you want to go to a cold, cheap place like Siberia?
Yeah.
So, but he didn't want to go there yet, so. I flew over Siberia too. That place sucks. So anyway, I'm going to use an example that actually the Prophet team uses because I really like it a lot, and it's really good. And it sort of shows the strengths of Prophet. So it's basically they give this example of the daily page views for the Wikipedia page for Peyton Manning, who last time I checked had retired from football. So you should expect to see hopefully a decline in the number of page views. So let's take a look at that. Again, same thing, bring in the data set. Log transforming the Y value in this case. It just helps bring the levels down, and it's better for time series forecasting. And then same sort of ceremony, make a future data frame, and get your forecast, and voila. Here's the forecast for page views for Peyton Manning's Wikipedia page. And I think the final date was, let me see, the forecast was 2017, January 19th. So why don't we take a look at how well this did. So it's predicting 8 page views. So I went ahead and looked on Wikipedia's page view analysis tool. And so, as you can see, it may have overpredicted it a bit, but it's still kind of in the range-ish. I mean, it's not saying it's going to be huge, but...
Is the page views in the y-axis?
Yeah, it's number of page views, log transformed.
Literal page views? Or
yeah, because the forecast was, so I wanted to compare apples to apples, So anyway, it didn't do it.
Why did it predict again?
Let's see, so on, I think maybe we have time for the 15th, so let's look. 15th it predicted 8, and it got 9. But then on the next day it predicted, I think, the same value, and it got 2 and 3. So again, not perfect, but not terrible either. So, and then you can go ahead and, so in traditional time series forecasting, you have your, you want to split out your components, as I alluded to earlier, your seasonal components, and trend components, and your white noise components, and all that. They do a bit of, they take a bit of a different tack here. So I'm going to give you, this is for the business analyst too, so you don't have to fuss around with, the traditional way, I guess. But trend over here. This is when it starts forecasting, and you can see the uncertainty bounds as it gets further and further out. So,
would those be the change points? Oh no, you got multiple years.
And then seasonality, the yearly seasonality for page views for Peyton Manning, Wikipedia. And then it brings us out to a weekly level, so you can see basically just in general over time, what does it look like? So, and then, I found these graphs are actually pretty helpful. Just a good diagnostic tool for the data, really. Like, if you wanted to figure out, like, at backcountry, right? Like the stuff you guys were doing with the seasonal curves and stuff back in the day. I mean, that would have been pretty a bit helpful. So, anyway, that's Profit in a nutshell. I would say that the Facebook team has done a terrific job at documenting the various ways you can use Profit. Like, for example, outliers. It's a big one in forecasting. In this case, there's some missing data here. So that translates into a terrible forecast going out because you have it doesn't know what to do. So the simplest thing to do, what they suggest, is just just ignore the missing data, and you get a tighter forecast. So, and they do a really good job at just explaining, the use cases for each of these things here. I think they just added you can use regressors as well. So I know this was a pain point in the past. If you wanted to see the effect of certain things, like this example here, they're giving the effect of like NFL Sunday on forecasts. I think this is like a forecast for the Super Bowl. So in this case, it's just okay. Well, football occurs every Sunday, but the problem is it applies to the history as well as the future, right? So I know in the past when I was doing modeling, it'd be like, okay, so we don't have anything for the future for the effects of, competitor ad spend, for example. But we can add in what we have and hopefully extrapolate that out. It doesn't, as far as I can tell, it's a bit more nuanced than that. It doesn't really do quite the same thing. And they got to be dummy variables, and they'll be standardized if they're not ones or zeros. But again, once you do that, then it'll show the effect of the regressors on your data as well. So again, I haven't used this in production. I have used Profit with 4 or 5 different customers in production at this point. I was at a data science consulting shop, and we had done time series forecasting for several customers. In one case, I think we did over 10,000 forecasts for them. So just putting Profit on a loop and just going to town, and then sanity checking with the CFO, making sure it worked. But it seemed to do a good job. It wasn't frightening. So it runs into some weird stuff where there's, like I said, anytime you're going to do forecasts, if you got like only a couple months worth of data, right, and you're trying to do a yearly forecast, all it's going to do is make a straight line because it doesn't know what else to do. It's like, well, there's a trend, and I'll just do that. So, or there's a data point, and I'll just take that and go forward. So, anyway, let me see here. So to recap, time series forecasting is a tool, and just a tool. The future is unknown. Domain expertise helps a ton. Just don't be afraid to go through the cycle of forecasting, being wrong, forecasting, being wrong, because you're going to be wrong. You're always wrong. I feel like I'm talking to my son. Honestly, though, throw your ego out the window, right? Like, and I would say if you're going to do this professionally too, like, get into the habit of talking to other people. Talk to sales, talk to marketing, figure out what's going to be going on. Like, this is it's not like you're programming, and you're stuck in, with your headphones on all day and can just zone out. I mean, it's very much an action-oriented sport. You got to talk to people. And start incorporating that data into your forecast. Again, Profit made it super easy to do just that. You can incorporate all sorts of outliers, holidays, whatever, into your forecast. And that's why I think, if you're doing business forecasting, this is, it would be the tool I would start with and probably end with. So, and let me see anything else here. Hammer nail, don't do that. Here's some resources. Facebook Profit, obviously, which you just saw. They like I said, they do have a white paper. I think it's about 13, 14 pages long. It's awesome. I would highly suggest reading it if you want more background on it. And again, here's some practical stuff too. There's a cheat sheet that Duke has for statistical forecasting. It's pretty old school. It looks like it's from the 90s, but a lot of this stuff a lot of this math hasn't changed since then either. This book that I have here this gem is from 1998. This is what I started with back in the day, Forecasting Methods and Applications, very excitingly titled, by Spiros whatever, and Rob Hinman, who, by the way, is responsible for this last link here. So he took this book and adapted it to an online form. So it's basically this with more current examples and also with examples using his R package forecast, which I think has been around since 2007. So and that's been a godsend for time series. And then what else here? Here's some ways you can contact me, and I'll make this presentation available for the public. And I think we got time for a few questions. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So. Questions, comments, or
Got some questions.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
So
you were talking about like tuning of parameters.
Yeah.
When you've done this, and you've set up models to try to forecast something, how many parameters are you usually tuning, and do you kind of tune them along with a domain expert, or does the domain expert understand the statistical
unless you're the
parameters?
domain expert, yeah. So
it's usually, do you like interpret those to them, or do you kind of listen to their feedback and then translate that into the model?
So if you're doing it manually, you'll be tuning the parameters. If you're using an automated solution, then the parameters are already tuned for you. And so the job you would do at that point is best interpreting how it did that, and explaining that. So, but otherwise, you'd have to have knowledge of how to tune it. And if you're the domain expert and you can tune, then awesome for you.
It's got to be a rarity, I would assume.
Yeah, it's a special breed for sure. I don't know that many people that can do that. I mean, my expertise is mainly in the areas of like operations and supply chain, for example. So I can actually do both. But that only came through having been forced into a job where I had to do both. Right. My background with that is I started a company where I think like $70 million at the time. I can't remember, but we doubled in sales every year to nearly $1 billion. And so, and I was in charge of forecasting and all the data stuff and figuring out the operation stuff because it was all sort of hand in hand. Like if you know the forecast, I would say like that you're pretty well equipped in a company to do other things because you actually know the numbers better than anybody else, especially if you're talking to other people. So that's how I came into it. But I would say it's a very unique situation that doesn't happen a lot. So yeah.
When you have so many parameters that you're tuning, do you have ways that you like to pull them out, like to find like, oh, these ones are not performing well?
I would say like in terms of forecasts, I've always looked at error measurements to determine whether or not I need to do anything. So MAPE is what I've used. It definitely does have its drawbacks, but I would say just doing an error analysis and just seeing what models are good and which ones are crap. It's as good a place to start as any. So I mean, it's what you do in machine learning right now, right? Just figure out which models are great or more importantly, too great and overfitting, and then figure out from there. So.
Just kind of back on this question, but are there like so in the stats models package, there's usually like a statistical readout after your regression is completed. Does Prophet have any of that?
Yeah, so I looked around for that, and I couldn't find anything that they printed out in the source code. When I have run it through the console and done a print statement, it has shown me some very cryptic output, like log something or other as it scrolls through like matrix style, and so I couldn't really read it, but I think it's coming from Stan when it does that. Because when I look at it, doesn't provide any diagnostics. Like it doesn't do MAPE, for example. Prophet doesn't. It doesn't give you error calculations. So you have to figure that out on your own. So there's some drawbacks, but for the business user, they just, I don't know, maybe it's important, maybe it's not. I think it's important, but maybe not. So you're just fine without it. What's up?
So we forecast a model that looks good, but it's just a model. And you have to talk to I really like I do A/B testing.
Yeah.
So your Hippo part was really I mean, I totally agree with that.
For sure.
Like, I'll tell people this is volatile. It's not set in stone, but it's winning, and they take it like it's winning, right? So, how do you communicate to your clients, right? Because I'm assuming you're doing like like you work like you do consulting, and how do you communicate to your clients that it's just a model and it might be wrong, or do you like that degree of like certainty?
Oh no, I definitely make it a caveat to like I try and be as honest as humanly possible, right? Because I just learned like if you try and approach this like this, right, and like, oh, this forecast is totally accurate and I can predict the future for anything in the world, like you're totally full of shit, and everyone can tell. And when, you know, so I mean, so I think it's just a matter of like just being honest and straight up with people. I don't know how else to put it. Like just say like this is at least statistically the best that we can fit to the data that we have, but understanding that nobody can predict the future, and you know your input into future events, I think, is where it's most valued. You know, that's how I approach it, because I'm looking for the input for what's coming down the pipe that could possibly alter this projection, right? So you know, I look at it from, if I'm doing an exercise like that, I mean that's how I approach it. Like I'd like a cooperation to understand like how would this be different from your expectations, and what could influence this? Because there's always something that comes down the line. I'm sure like new marketing campaign, which is totally that never happened before. That's going to change things, right? I mean that's how I'd approach it, and that's how I have to approach it. But I mean I just learned not to be too mathy or I guess too optimistic about my forecast. I've learned to become very pessimistic because I've been wrong so many times. I just had the life beat out of me. Because after a while you realize like it's just a tool like anything else, right? So I think if you can convey that to people, I think they really appreciate it. Because at a minimum though, it does provide an objective look at the data that's not influenced by human input. And I think it's a great place to start. I mean, what is the alternative?
Oh, I
right?
agree with
No, I mean, yeah, no. That's the question I would ask if somebody rebuts it though. Like, what is the alternative to this? Right? Like, are you going to just, kind of guess?
Flip a coin.
Right. Or just draw lines and, like kind of charting, or it's complete hogwash. Like, you got to start from somewhere. And this is as good a place to start from any. And so, yeah.
And I think adding that, if your decision makers can ignore what you're going to say, that's kind of on them.
Yep.
They're going to do it anyway.
Well, I deal with that every day, but I'm
Yeah.
just wondering. I mean, he does consulting, right? So I'm just wondering, like, if he had
Yeah, no, it happens. I
good
think all the
tips
time.
with dealing with, business-hungry people that aren't necessarily mathy people.
It happens in every company. There's always that person who happens to have probably more influence than a lot of people and don't trust the forecast for whatever reason. And and candidly, I think you'll find a lot of it's political too, right? Like,
Totally.
It's just how it is. I mean, you come with a forecast, and sales guy has their forecast, and CEO has their own, and salespeople want to sandbag the forecast because they want to just, under promise and over deliver and something like that. So I mean, there's a whole host of things that you just got to be really aware of. Yeah.
Have you ever had to defend or been asked to explain why the company didn't perform according to your forecast?
Yeah.
Where they believed the forecast so much that now you have to explain why it didn't perform that way.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's hopefully the people are sympathetic to you, right? I mean, that's about establishing relationships as much as anything else. And I think as much as anything else, like I said, like forecasts early and often with other people, communication. Like, you don't want to blindside anybody with your forecast. The last thing you want to do is say, cool, so CEO, like that forecast that I told you about, like we're totally like 70% under that at the end of the year when they're making the new plans. The forecast should be an early warning sign, if anything. Like, here's where we think we're going, and here's where we're actually going, or here's where we're actually going, which is also a problem because you are not anticipating growth at this point either. These are all realistic things that happen. But I think, I've had to explain that before, and it sucked. At the company that I mentioned that was doubling in growth, because it was the opposite problem, right? Like, we grew too fast, and I couldn't figure that out. Because you keep adding on all these different accounts, and that's where, again, the math isn't going to help you. You start adding on like a store like Costco that adds like they're starting to buy from you at $20 million at a time or more. Like that kind of changes everything if you're used to selling only $2 million in an order. So that's where the extra modeling comes in on top of that. It becomes manual work at that point because there's no way you would be able to capture that nuance otherwise. So I think what it all comes down to I think collaborating with sales and executives as much as humanly possible. So, because otherwise you find yourself blindsided and probably out on the street. So.
Any other questions?
Cool. Yeah, hi.
How often do you read these forecasts?
How often do what?
These forecasts, like, let's say, about any product or about anything, about any business.
So
idea.
it depends on the company and the use case, right? So if you're doing like product forecasting, I mean, those forecasts could update every single day, just if you're doing automated forecasting. But, in the consulting work that I'd done, like they just wanted to forecast, for general ledger accounting, for example, financial accounting, they just wanted to forecast every quarter. So that CFO can then go to the CEO and talk about how great the numbers look. So it's just on a case-by-case basis, really. But I think if you have an automated system, I mean, they I think by default just update every day. But again, it's kind of like what you got to understand, like what value would you really be getting out of like a daily changing forecast, right? So it comes down to the business value as well, as much as anything. So if it's not really going to markedly matter if your forecast changes every day, if people only look at it every week or something, then I don't know. Right, so it depends on the user. Any other questions? Cool, thanks.
Another round of applause. Thank you, Sweet, so it's raffle time. Everybody's favorite time for this thing, for people at home who decided not to come. We're missing out. So check your name tag. Does it have a number on it? If it doesn't have a number on it, let me know right now or forever hold your peace. You don't have a number on your name tag?
I don't actually have a name tag.
If you don't have a name tag, that's even worse.
You don't have a name.
Do you have a name? To start. Who has number 36? How far did we get? 40?
46.
46. Who has 46?
Me.
Ken. Okay, who has 47? Anybody? Okay, you're 47. You're 48. Sound good? Wow, that's a lot. So I'm going to do some live coding here. Yeah. What was it? 40, what did I say? 48. I'm 0, so +1. I can't read what's on my side, so I'm like coding by touch. Or I could just do that. No.
Not a touch time.
There we go. Random.randint, 0, number of Pythonistas. So that's me included. So, you want to hit enter? Or wait, which we give? Actually, you get your choice of book or soldering kit. I would recommend not grabbing this unless you have a Raspberry Pi. And if you don't know how to solder, this is actually a really great kit to learn. But if you don't have a Raspberry Pi, you'll just be depressed. So
You're saying it's not
more
useful
so.
on its own.
Yes, I'm only giving away the tree part of this. So.
Do you want me to do
Yeah.
the honors?
Yeah, as it said, just press enter.
This button?
13. Who's 13?
Lucky 13.
Lucky 13.
No one?
Going once. Going twice. Okay, hit enter again.
Wow.
38. Yeah.
I was about to complain because that's with replacement, but
I'm gonna go with this one. This guy's cool.
What about replacement? What?
that's a selection with replacement. Never mind.
We'll just, yeah, I get it. 29.
29.
Awesome.
Congrats.
I get the book right.
Up to you, your choice.
Yeah, I can't solder.
Okay. A wise man is one who knows they know nothing. Or at least they know
41.
41. Who's 41? They leave?
They probably left.
Going once, going twice, lost it. Next. 5. Yeah. Are you new? Well, congrats.
Thank you.
If the new gets it, then we know we get the right ratio. Sweet. And if you get this one and you don't want a soldering kit, you can pass. 2.
Oh, wow.
You want a soldering kit?
I'll take your breath and just go
Get one. Yeah, congrats.
Time to get one.
Yeah, this is a sign to get one.
The universe decided it.
And you'll notice on that circuit
there are
board.
white elephant parties coming up.
Yeah, that's
so.
true. There is on the circuit board. It'll tell you on that PCB board. It'll tell you what site to go to, and it'll give you assembly instructions and soldering instructions. So. Cool. Yeah, I ordered these in August. That's how long they took to get here. I will see you next year, second week of January. Thank you all for coming. Drive safely.
Thank you, Pharisee.
Oh, yeah, that's yeah, I've like seen